we'll be discussing current events on the front line and news happening in Ukraine and around the world. Unfortunately, we can't record nicely in a studio right now. It's getting harder and harder, especially since the commanders are far away. I'm pleased to welcome today, joining us remotely, the commander of the 429th Separate Unmanned Systems Regiment, ACHILLES Yuri Fedorenko, who is connecting with us from Donetsk region. And I'd like to start right away with a question. What is the situation in Pokrovsk, where our regiment, the ACHILLES Regiment, is currently carrying out combat missions?
Glad to be here, glory to Ukraine, and good time for battle. As for the 429th ACHILLES Regiment, we've probably discussed more than once that we carry out missions wherever things are about to get tough or have already become critical. By tough times, I mean a difficult operational situation. And right now, there are a lot of legends, rumors, opinions, and suggestions circulating from all sorts of people, basically from everyone except those actually involved in military affairs, about the current state of things, the position of our troops, and what awaits us next in this particular area. We need to talk about the following things. If we're talking about Pokrovsk or, for example, any other sector, we have to look at the situation much more broadly. What do I mean by that? We have to start from the enemy's intentions, goals, and objectives. The enemy's goals and objectives remain unchanged at this point. This means the destruction of Ukrainian statehood and the destruction of us, you and me. The enemy has divided the fulfillment of these tasks into specific areas of combat operations and into certain stages. Right now, for the enemy, Donetsk region is one of the key areas. Without any exaggeration, it is here that the key battle of the Russian-Ukrainian war is unfolding. The enemy is concentrating an unprecedented amount of forces and resources to achieve their goal. Additionally, it is fundamentally important for the enemy to gain a foothold in Pokrovsk. Why? Because winter is coming, and as a result, facing winter out in the open, in the fields, in the forest belts is very different from spending winter in a large town where you can hide in a basement, heat it, set up an ammunition storage system, and do many other things. This is important for the enemy. But will he be able to do it, to accomplish this task, to fully carry it out as planned? In the short term, in my opinion, no, and we will still be able to strike the enemy effectively for a long time, both on the outskirts and within the town itself, not allowing them to advance further. But for this to happen fully, as I said, we need to have additional forces, meaning the reinforcement of troops, and this is directly connected to the processes of reinforcement, mobilization, and recruitment. And also, of course, we need to have a sufficient number of drones and other equipment and machinery necessary for carrying out combat missions. And when I say we, I mean the defense forces. That is why at the moment we are able to effectively strike the enemy both at the location itself and, accordingly, on the outskirts, where the enemy tries to attack on the flanks. But the situation is truly as difficult as it gets. I urge everyone. There are many opinions, including those of respected authorities who represent a part of Ukrainian society and hold a high level of credibility and influence. I sincerely ask you, friends, you are well-educated people. The Ukrainian nation is a nation of educated individuals. Analyze everything you are told, but first and foremost, rely on the statements of those who possess the complete information along the line of contact. In reality, only the General Staff can truly have such complete information. Some may like this, some may not. Everyone has a different level of trust. But I am convinced that you have the ability and the means to process the entire flow of information that enters the public space and to truly understand what is happening on the section of the line where information is lacking. So I will say this, the situation is extremely difficult without any exaggeration. But the defense forces are doing the impossible. And without any exaggeration, every moment, every hour, every day, a feat is being accomplished by the Ukrainian military.
Right now, information is spreading quite actively on social media. Users are calling for our troops to be withdrawn from Pokrovsk. And I approach this extremely cautiously because, for example, if I know this much information, you know this much, but the actual information is like this. How is it best to apply critical thinking and analyze information so that you are informed, but at the same time do not cause harm? Harm to the defense forces, because we understand that not everything that appears in the public domain is necessarily true.
A lot depends on the accuracy of the information provided by commanders who are directly carrying out tasks on the reconnaissance line and commanding their military units. By the units, and so that this information reaches the senior commander without distortion, who is authorized to decide on the tactics that will be most effective for preserving our territories, but at the same time, for saving the lives of our servicemen. Therefore, if we talk about us, for example, there is a lot I could say, and I have been observing the theater of operations for the past 4 years in the most difficult areas. But can my opinion be objective? No, you said it absolutely right. We know this much, the higher level of leadership knows this much, and an even higher level knows even more, how things are happening, where we can deploy reserves, how we can reinforce, and so on. So this is my subjective opinion. Everyone in their position, whoever is assigned 2 tasks, must perform those tasks with quality. If we talk about the 429th AHLS Regiment, we have been assigned a specific sector for which we are responsible in terms of reconnaissance, delivering fire strikes, and we also carry out a certain range of other tasks. And the guys and girls who are directly carrying out combat missions on the front line, understanding the difficulties and the complexity of logistics, perform their tasks with a certain ferocity. They understand just how important what they are doing on the battlefield is. And as a result, decisions are made on social media about how exactly the troops should be moved, according to the opinion of this or that expert, or even respected military personnel who hold positions at the tactical level. In my opinion, every viewpoint should be listened to, analyzed, and the right decision should be made. But this decision is made by the senior commander based on information that must be truthful, provided by the military units on the front line. We must also remember that, in any case, in various situations of troop encirclement, it is essential, by all means and possibilities, to break through so that this does not happen, so that logistics remain at a certain level. But at the same time, we also need to talk about something else. We need to say that every meter of our land that we defend comes at a certain price. Blood, sweat, effort. And unfortunately, the highest gift given by God is life. The return of every meter of our land, if it was occupied and we take it back by military means, comes at a completely different price. From the perspective of military strategy, it's 1 to 3. That is, when we are defending, we need a certain amount of forces and resources, and accordingly, there will unfortunately be a certain number of injuries and losses. But when we launch offensive actions and drive the enemy out, it's 3 times as much right away. This is something we also need to remember. And now, in these difficult times, and the times are indeed very difficult and tense, because the final decisions have not yet been made, the decisive battles have not yet taken place, they are unfolding right now. We must do everything possible to preserve Ukrainian statehood. Because otherwise, if we fail to achieve this, each of us must realize that the tremendous contribution of the Ukrainian people and those who have taken up arms will be completely nullified by the aggressor. And the enemy has done everything possible to cut off our heads so that in the future we would no longer be able to grow as an independent state. This must be understood and remembered, just like those who are now running away from updating their information at the territorial recruitment centers, those who are evading military service. We get a lot of hate, but friends, well, if you don't fight for your own country, you'll have to fight in the occupier's country, because the occupied territories, one way or another, mobilize the remaining Ukrainian potential, those who stayed under occupation between the ages of 18 and 55, and use them as expendable material for combat operations with the lowest level of support on the most difficult front lines. But this is already happening now. These are not just the words of Yuri Fedorenko. Unfortunately, this is the reality of our times. So please think about it. Think very actively and persistently, as you should. I read a comment, someone sent it to me since I don't really have time to read comments myself. Someone sent it and it says, just open the borders and we'll ensure the safety of our families, but abroad. Friends, you need to understand and perhaps comment on the level of threats. If Ukraine does not stand up, the war will spread further. The war will come to the countries of the European Union, which are less prepared, which are less coordinated, which cannot make the kinds of decisions that the Ukrainian people and the Ukrainian military are making. And still, even if you run, unfortunately, the war will catch up with you. Unfortunately, I have great respect for the Georgians. They have done a lot of good for Ukraine. They are fighting in the ranks of the armed forces of Ukraine. But you see how things turned out. At one time, families left, they didn't have the kind of support in Ukraine. They probably didn't have the opportunity to stand up to the Russian Federation for a long period of time, although who knows. And in trying to save their families from the war, some of them ended up in Ukraine. And now these children And these men are fighting against the Russian aggressor, but now as part of the Ukrainian army. They remained on the side of democracy and truth, but there are other cases as well. Those areas that were occupied, the men there are now fighting in the army of the empire, which is now called the Russian Federation, a terrorist one which devours everything living, everything healthy that is near it. Russia can probably be compared to an aggressive form of cancer.
Returning to the front line, the 429th Regiment is fighting simultaneously in two, well, according to even the commander-in-chief, the hottest directions, Pokrovsk and Kupyansk. Can you name the fundamental difference between these directions? How are they different? How does the enemy behave in Pokrovsk and in Kupiansk?
The first thing to focus on is the number of forces and resources the enemy has amassed. In Donetsk region, and in particular in the Kupiansk area, it varies from day to day, but the statistics speak for themselves. For example, if we take the Kupiansk area, where there are constant intense assault operations and monitoring of enemy forces and resources, let's talk primarily about manpower, then the defenders are recording the movement of up to 200 enemy servicemen. It varies from day to day. Weather conditions affect this, as does the intensity with which the enemy moves, among other factors. But it's up to 200 if we take a 25-kilometer stretch along the front line. If we take exactly the same stretch near Pokrovsk, then it's from 500. That is almost 2.5 times more. Furthermore, if a characteristic feature of combat operations in the Kharkiv region is the enemy's movement at night, which is less intense, then in Donetsk region, they just push forward at any time of day. Some use camouflage suits that hinder our reconnaissance, meaning that because they're made from specific materials, our cameras can't see them. But there are certain signs by which we detect them. And in this way, the enemy ensures uninterrupted assault operations in the Donetsk sector both day and night. This doesn't mean that the enemy isn't assaulting in the Kharkiv region. They are, but the intensity is somewhat different. What else should we mention? The number of times artillery, aviation, and drones are used. Objectively, in Donetsk, the enemy uses them on various fronts, and in some places even up to 40% more compared to others. As for the Kupiansk area, the intensity there is very high. And if we look at another section of the front line in Kharkiv region, there are quite obvious fluctuations in terms of intensity and the amount of equipment the enemy uses. Meanwhile, the front line in Donetsk region, whether it's the Kostiantynivka direction, the Dobropilia direction, or Pokrovsk itself, remains highly dynamic. This indicates that the enemy is prioritizing these sectors and allocating their best resources for active offensive and assault operations. The enemy is trying to fulfill the task of occupying Donetsk region by the end of the current year. But it is absolutely clear that with resilience and with the support of citizens for the armed forces of Ukraine, it will be extremely difficult for the enemy to accomplish this task. And in my conviction, God willing, everything will be fine. It will be impossible for them.
How are the enemy's assault operations currently being carried out, and what do they look like? So, as I understand it, there are practically no mechanized assaults involving heavily armored and lightly armored vehicles taking place. Basically, it's all infantry assaults, right?
This is the historical development of unmanned systems. Under favorable weather conditions, the enemy's lightly armored and armored vehicles, despite dynamic protection, makeshift grills, and sheds they weld on, are destroyed even as they approach the line of contact. And to break through the line of contact and move further is more the exception than the rule. This became possible thanks to our unmanned systems. However, when our forces, meaning the defense forces, just so everyone understands correctly, because the defense forces are developing technologically and upgrading those units that enable highly effective task execution and the development of delivering firepower, it is also worth noting that in adverse weather conditions, the situation looks completely different. The enemy still has a certain number of lightly armored vehicles in reserve. We should not underestimate their capabilities. They are taking equipment out of storage, modernizing it, adapting it for further use in combat operations, and sending it to the front. As a result, when there is fog and rain, the enemy tries to use armored vehicles to move their personnel in numbers. However, these are isolated assault actions using armor, which take place in different sectors. As for the main tactic, it is infantry movement, meaning the enemy has a lot of expendable personnel. They move on foot and on two-wheeled motorcycles, as well as any other vehicles, anything that can drive. Let me give you a specific example with footage that has circulated throughout the country. When the enemy was advancing into Pokrovsk, pay attention to the kind of vehicles they were using. And then this so-called column was shot up and destroyed by the defense forces. But these are motorcycles, cars taken from civilians, anything that can move forward. To talk about, it's probably not worth discussing the enemy's ability to use advanced, highly maneuverable vehicles. But at the same time, we shouldn't underestimate the enemy's ability to employ various technological solutions either. I won't give a specific example. Now, cabs have started to reach further, and in 2025, production will continue. What do I mean by further? They have become more resilient. The enemy has taken certain measures to, let's say, counter our electronic warfare systems, and in addition, they now reach farther than before. As a result, they hit more accurately. But the vast majority of cables we've encountered now on the combat reporting line that haven't been destroyed, well, no one here asks why we need them. We take those cables and so on. Let's leave that aside for now. But this is also a tool for secondary. These are materials that are then directed toward the enemy, and the vast majority are from 2025 production. What does this mean? It means that the stockpiles of munitions that were accumulated in the Soviet Union have basically run out. And now what's important? Let's model the situation in a positive way. We have the Flamingo missile. Everyone has their own opinion about how it works or doesn't work. Some are optimistic, others are skeptical. Personally, I'm optimistic. It's a great achievement that Ukraine has preserved its missile program. But at the same time, there is still the prospect that we could receive Western weaponry. Well, the same goes for the Tomahawk, for example. The question is about increasing the chances. No one has said for sure that you won't get them. And here there's another component. If the US gives us Tomahawks, then the EU countries, the North Atlantic Alliance, they start thinking, if the US gave them, then we can too. That's how it was with the tanks. Remember when the US gave us Abrams tanks and Germany was like, oh right, Leopards, of course we remembered, we have them, take them. It's the same with missile weaponry. And now let's imagine that Ukraine actually managed to get a certain number of missiles from our partners with permission to use them against military targets on the territory of the Russian Federation, plus, in addition, our own Flamin missiles, plus additionally, our deep strikes. And we attacked the cluster of enterprises responsible for manufacturing guided geopumps. Those that manufacture components, those that produce explosives, those that assemble and specifically put together these munitions. As a result, the enemy will no longer be able to operate on the fly. Accordingly, the intensity of the use of guided geobombs will decrease significantly. Additionally, if Ukraine receives extra missile weaponry, the enemy's aviation will be forced to constantly relocate. And if they are forced to constantly relocate, the frequency of takeoffs and combat use will be much lower than it is now. It is in this context that we have to say, despite the enemy's assault actions, the tactics they use on the front line of combat, the equipment they employ, we need to operate on three fronts. The first is the tactical level, that is, destroying everything that moves toward us on the front line of combat. The priority is infantry, of course, as well as enemy UAV operators, enemy artillery, and the routes and supply lines in the directions where the enemy is concentrating, the routes the enemy is trying to use to advance. Next, we need to talk about the operational tactical depth. These are the places where the enemy launches its various strike and reconnaissance assets, such as Supercam, ZAL, more likely Supercam, and additionally Orlan. In other words, they also need to be under fire control, because the more we destroy the enemy at this distance, the fewer of them reach the front line without losses, and the less they can perform reconnaissance functions. Accordingly, the strategic level is everything related to destroying the enemy deep within the Russian Federation. If we comprehensively impact these three components, as a result, we will automatically destroy the enemy's ability to conduct strike and assault operations. And in addition, we must also understand that it fights as long as it has money. Right now, we have improved the sanctions policy situation regarding facilities that generate petroleum products on the territory of the Russian Federation. Accordingly, there is less money now. And what if some unknown patriots were to send the shadow fleet, which circumvents Western sanctions, to the bottom? Then the situation could be even more comprehensively improved. As you can see, we have every prospect of holding out in this war, but a lot of prerequisites must come together in Ukraine's favor. And these prerequisites, including financial support and technological assistance from our partners, are not gained at round tables. They are earned first and foremost on the battlefield. When the front line holds strong, when the defense forces stand firm, then our military and political leadership gains the necessary leverage in negotiations, which sometimes secures what seems like impossible and unprecedented levels of support and assistance for Ukraine. This is also a complex and colossal task, but we are very closely interconnected.
You mentioned that in the area of operations in the Kupiansk direction, approximately 200 occupiers appear every day. In Pokrovsk, this number is 500. Are there enough drones for the effective elimination of the enemy? Because we understand that sometimes one drone is not enough to completely neutralize the enemy.
My opinion cannot be considered representative, and I'll try to explain why. We are part of the Dronline project, which was initiated by the President of Ukraine. And as a result, to organize this drone line and to ensure the comprehensive destruction of the enemy at the tactical and operational tactical levels, significant funding was allocated by the state to our units that joined this initiative. And again, why did we join it? Because they selected those units that were the most effective on the combat reporting line, organized them into the drone line, expanded their staffing, and provided them with financial and technical resources. Additionally, there is support from our partners. A significant number of Ukrainian-made drones are provided to us thanks to funding from our partners. Therefore, in the Achilles regiment, for most types, we have drones waiting for operators, not the other way around. But it wasn't always like this. Before joining the Dronline project, someday I might write about it, maybe if someone is interested, or just for myself in my memoirs, everything we had to do to get that drone or anything else. Let's just leave that aside for now, maybe for future generations if they're interested. Now, the situation is different. In the military, the situation is not the same as ours. That is, in the military, each unit has different supplies and different provisioning. Some receive drones from previous stockpiles that are already outdated for the front line, so they need to be upgraded and so on. Understanding this problem, the current military and political leadership. At first, this is being done experimentally, but most likely it will become common practice. In addition to centralized supply of various equipment, ammunition, and drones, they are considering the possibility of allocating funding to each military unit in a certain amount, so that the unit can purchase what it needs for combat operations right now. Accordingly, in 2026, if all partners fulfill their commitments and we have a sufficient budget, it is absolutely clear that the situation, the military as a whole, should improve in terms of receiving high-quality drones. But the dynamics of combat are so intense that, for example, the first thing that comes to mind, because we use their products, is the fundraising by Yuri Fedorenko for Rusarist. Be sure to support them. You have to understand that these drones go to those units, to those positions that really need them. How do I know this? Because for a long period of time, when we lived in complete brotherhood, drones, I said that we did everything possible to get that drone. We always turned to the Fedorenko Foundation, and they helped us, just like with other foundations in our country, but his help was the greatest, and it was really high-quality drones that performed effective tasks on the front line. This also needs to be talked about. Accordingly, even when all the state programs are up and running, that is, direct funding of military units, additional support from partners, and increased supply of drones at the national level, we will still need to donate and help the military so that we have enough drones. Because to destroy a single enemy, you don't always need just one FPV drone. Or rather, it's not always enough to have just one FPV kamikaze drone. It might take 3, it might take 5, and sometimes you might even need to chase them down with a heavy bomber afterwards. It varies. So the more drones we have, the better. If we compare ourselves to the enemy, we could also briefly go through a comparative table, but probably next time, since we're short on time. But when it comes to regular FPV drones, the enemy sometimes has a slight advantage and sometimes it's complete parity. And in which areas do we have the advantage? But when it comes to FPV drones on fiber optics, that's where the problem lies. It's a tough problem because Russia gets the best fiber optic cable from China. In China, Russia gets the best drone components, and as a result, they are now several steps ahead with drones that operate using fiber optic cable communication. And as a result, they can operate in weather conditions that are critically difficult for us to work in. And they are able to complete tasks thanks to the quality of these drones' communication. We will catch up somewhere in the second half of 2026, but this remains a problem. At the same time, the enemy is doing everything possible to create the Baba Yaga. We've even started shooting them down first, various modifications. And they will achieve this in 2026. I'll be honest, I thought it would happen sooner, but no, the enemy hasn't managed it yet. Meanwhile, we have heavy bombers, like the Baba Yaga of various types. At the beginning of their use, these were more like hybrids between agricultural and civilian drones, actually. A mix of construction with a rhinoceros, as they say, but at the current moment, these are exclusively high-quality, military-heavy bombers that perform a number of important tasks on the line of combat engagement. This includes mining, delivering fire strikes on various categories of targets, and of course, transporting logistical cargo to the front line of combat engagement. Here we are absolute leaders. We will also discuss other types of equipment, but we'll leave that for the next segment. So overall, the enemy is disrupting unmanned systems, trying to get ahead of us, and on our side, we're also stepping on the gas full throttle. But there is one issue. Every drone is piloted by someone. That someone is our main asset in this war. It's people. Usually younger people do this more effectively. This is related to physiology, to signal transmission, between neurons and between the organs that control movement. And for us, although there are different types, again, there are different pilots, including in the 429th HLS regiment of various ages who effectively carry out their missions. What did Russia do? Right now, they are actively recruiting those guys who are 17.5, 17 and 16.5 years old through public organizations to train them in various types of unmanned systems. As a result, they are building up their personnel potential for further combat operations. As soon as they turn 18, it's a contract, a signing bonus, and off they go to fight against Ukraine. At the same time, it's clear that we don't have such an opportunity. That's why a huge number of women are now serving specifically in combat positions and carrying out tasks on par with men. This is a difficult challenge for the Ukrainian nation, but if someone is hiding, then someone else has to fill in. And those someones are found among the conscious citizens of Ukraine who understand that they must defend what is most precious with weapons in hand. And of course, those who are not subject to military service, unless it's a specialized profession. But right now, there are many women serving who fight very persistently and are in no way inferior to men.
Commander, thank you for the conversation, and thank you to our esteemed audience for being with us. Be sure to subscribe to our channel, leave a comment, and if you have any questions for the commander or anyone else from our personnel, let us know. And of course, join the 429th Separate Regiment of Unmanned Systems, remembering that here drones are waiting for pilots, not pilots waiting for drones. Thank you for being with us. See you next time.
Thank you.